Hi. Welcome to CHD 10, our 6-week speed summer session. I am excited that you have all gotten engaged in the syllabus discussions and started asking so many wonderful questions. If you did not get online last week, please do not worry. Everything that was done last week was just an opportunity to become familiar with Canvas if you weren't familiar. All those same materials are available to you now that were available last week as well. I wanted to walk you through Canvas and show you what's here and answer a few questions. Every week when you start the week, you'll see a page like this one that will be on your home screen. So when you open Canvas, this should be the first thing that you see tomorrow morning. What you'll see there is a to-do list and a list of resources for you as well. There will be Zoom meetings twice a week. Those meetings are optional. I do strongly encourage you to attend one or the other because it will be an opportunity for you to get your questions answered and to form a sense of community with the rest of the students in class. They are optional. They're not part of the core part of the class, but I find that they're very helpful in answering a lot of the questions that normally come up and discussing content that you're curious about or conversations that you want to have more in depth. So the first one of those, considering it to be an orientation to Canvas, is tomorrow night or tonight, Monday, June 8th from 7 to 7:45 p.m. And the link is here in this page that you'll see on your home screen when you log in. If you need more help with Canvas, there's a link here to the Mission College online learning resources, and they have a variety of videos and supports for you. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about how very unusual the world is right now, that we are in what people are calling unprecedented times. And that means that we haven't seen anything like this ever. The combination of the pandemic of COVID-19 and the protests for Black Lives Matter and for police reform to protect the lives of people in our society equally and not based on the color of their skin. Both of these have created a lot of anxiety, concern, and stress for all of us. There are definitely many students who, over the past few months, have struggled with the content of a course, even a semester-long course, one that's not going for 6 weeks, and they have had challenges, and I expect that you're going to have challenges as well. I am here to help you be successful in this class, so please reach out to me. If something happens in your life or your family and you're finding it a struggle to complete this course, please talk to me sooner rather than later so that I can help. And again, those Zoom times will be a great opportunity to check in as well. In the letter this week, I've posted a lot of COVID-19 resources. I'll probably leave those in every week and add to them if I find others. But I find that these resources are really helpful for families and children and teachers as you're going back into the workforce. So please feel free to click on those and utilize those. They're not required. They're just optional resources to support you. At the bottom of the screen, what you'll see is a note for this week, and that note will change each week. So this week, you'll see instructions from me about the Zoom, how the modules are given, and then down here, there'll be objectives for the week. Those are taken directly from the course objectives in the online on record. So those objectives are what we have set as an instructor you will be able to do by the time you complete this course. So this week we're going to be focusing on describing and discussing the history, philosophy, and program models of early childhood within cultural context and relate them to current programs and practices. We're going to describe the characteristics of effective relationships and interactions between early childhood professionals, children, families, and colleagues, including the importance of collaboration. That second one particularly, but also philosophy, will carry throughout multiple modules. It won't just be this one week. This class is really a survey course of all of the information in early childhood education, which makes it a tough course because every single week in a normal semester, we're covering content that could be in an entire 3-unit class. So that means every week during the summer, we're covering content that could be content in three different classes, 3-unit classes. And we're bringing that down into smaller components to give you just a taste of that information. So for this week, I want you to review the materials and information in the Welcome Orientation pre-class module. Some of you have started to do that last week. Some of you will be doing that when you get started today. The other thing I want you to do then is work through your Module 1 introductions for week 1. And this one has a little less material than we'll see in week 2, 3, 4, because it is our first week and we're all finding our footing and looking for the readings. You should be reading through chapter 1 and 2 in your book this week, although chapter 1 is the one we're discussing. Read through chapter 1 and 2. The assignments that are due, you're going to have an introduction assignment. Your post needs to be in by Friday, June 12th, or you will be removed from the class. I have a large number of people still on the wait list. So I want to make sure that if you want to be in the class, post in that introductions discussion so that I know that you want to be here. The syllabus questions discussion is also due. I forgot to add this, so I'll add it before I post the page. There's a reading reflection discussion due by the end of the week. That's a fairly long post because you're going to be responding to certain questions. And then there's a philosophy statement that you'll turn in on Thursday of next week. So you have a week and a half to work on that. And that's your first biggish assignment or major assignment. When you go to modules, and you can click that here as well, you can click on this Welcome Orientation Pre-Class module, and it will take you directly to the module that it's referring to. The Welcome Pre-Class Orientation module has information about Canvas. It talks about, there's a video that I made about managing discussions and notifications in Canvas. I find this is really useful for students in my courses because it explains how I set things up and gives you some tips for moving through in a way that's less confusing. A little introduction to me. Who am I? And there's information in there. You'll probably see my cats and dogs at some point during the videos. They like to visit. Our readings for the whole semester, there's that section of the syllabus I put in the pre-class module so that you can make sure that you have your book. If you don't have your book, it is available as a Kindle on Amazon. And I understand that on Chegg, if you get the book, they'll give you a section of it to read while you're waiting for it to arrive in the mail. There's other posts, people have been posting in the syllabus review about where to find the textbook. So please look down there if you haven't gotten your textbook yet, and do make that your first priority this week so you can stay on track. The syllabus in a PDF form or a Word form is here in this welcome module. And then there's a syllabus review discussion, and there's a lot of posts out here. So if you haven't been out here last week, many people got started with that discussion early, and it was helpful for me to get information out to people right away, that especially about the textbook, that would have been hard to wait till Monday. However, you can still post there. It's not due till June 14th, so you have time to post in that discussion. What that discussion is asking you to do is to read through the syllabus first and then ask any questions that you have from the syllabus. If you don't have questions, just say that you don't have questions. As you can see here, we've had 82 posts in this discussion, and 18 of them I haven't read, so I need to go catch up on those as well. Also in that welcome module is a survey for group Zoom time. I looked at the answers we already had from the people who had posted, and that's how I came up with Monday night for our first Zoom time. I'm going to look for the second Zoom time later in the week that will meet the needs of whoever can't make Monday. So please be very, very specific about what times you can and can't make so that I can make sure what times I'm available are the best times for you and that you have access to me if you need it. You must look at all of these before you move to Module 1. So if you click on Module 1 and it's saying, I'm sorry, you haven't completed the previous module, what it means is it wants you to go back and look at this module. So just make sure to click on each of the links. If you don't want to read the syllabus on here, just click on it so that you can move to the next module. I'm trying to make sure that you've completed one set of work before you move on to the next. We'll see if that works. I haven't published this module yet. When I do, it'll turn green on my screen, but you will be able to see it by 8 a.m. on Monday morning. There's an introductions discussion. Please tell me a little bit about yourself. There's some guiding questions to help, and then read other people's posts and respond to them. That will be true in every single discussion you have in this course. I expect you to post your own original post and then respond to other people's discussions. This introduction discussion is particularly important because you must post there by Friday the 12th or Friday the 10th, sorry. 12th? 12th, sorry. My dates are getting confused. You must post in there by Friday the 12th to stay enrolled in the class. I have people on the waiting list waiting to find out whether or not you're going to drop. So if you're going to drop, please let me know so that I can let somebody else in who needs the course. There's a PowerPoint that I'm going to go through in the video right now, and this video will take the place of that PowerPoint in the list so that it's a video instead of just a flat file. There's a couple of videos to watch, an article to read, a link to our professional organization, so you can take a look at that. And then there's guidelines for your written assignments. I want you to look those over this week. Every assignment that you turn in, starting with the philosophy assignment you're going to turn in next week, please follow these guidelines. It will help you get full points on your assignments if you follow those guidelines. And then there's a reading reflection discussion with guiding questions. So take a look at that. Make sure again to post and reply to at least 2 other students. So if you have questions, always feel free to send me a message here on inbox. It's the fastest way to reach me, and I am online multiple times during a day, so you'll be able to find me there. All right, let me get to the PowerPoint. There we go. My PowerPoint is set up so it closed captions as I'm talking. I will close caption the first part of the video using another piece of software, but I'll leave the captioning for the PowerPoint based on this dictation that I do as I read. For this first week, we're going to be talking about the history and current issues of early childhood education. And I want to insert information that's not just from the book, so I'll scan fast through some pieces that I know you're going to read, so you'll get it in the readings, and give you some information that expands further than what the book has and gives you other information as well. I am expecting you to read the book, and that's why I don't go in detail in all the things that you've read in the book. I know that you can read and get that information there. I want to give you expanding information. When we look at the history of education, you're going to read about people who have contributed to our philosophies and ideas of how children learn. As you read, notice that the majority of people we talk about in the education field are white. That's because our society has valued the information coming from white scientists more than it has the information coming from other scientists. We also have given opportunities to people who are white to achieve educational frontiers that we have not given to other individuals within our society, especially within the Western culture, within Europe and the United States. And so I want you to really think about that critically and think about the voices that are being heard in our field, and are they really representative of different cultures? Maria Montessori was one of the first women who really talked about how children develop and how they learn. And she found a way to understand the needs of low-income children that people had never talked about before. She was one of the first pioneers to say these children should not be written off. They are smart and they can learn. And that's how her philosophy developed, was she took these children who had been written off by society and helped them basically by listening to them and listening to their play. So there's more about all of these people in our book. They all have valuable information about how children learn. There are many other people who also had valuable information about how children and adults learn that didn't make our book. And that is some of the institutionalized bias that we have in any field. And so I want you to think about that as you read and as you write. So some important names, a few of them. Comenius talked about the observation and the natural order of development. He talked about readiness. Are children ready to learn certain things? Locke developed the scientific method. How do we research something and find out whether or not it's true? He talked about the mind and learning. He believed that children were a tabula rasa, which meant that they were a blank slate. What we gave them in society is what they got. We now know that's not true. We know that children come into the world with DNA. They come in with temperaments, with a lot of things that are pre-programmed into who they are prior to their birth. It's genetic. Locke looked at individual differences as well, so you'll read a lot more about him in the book. Rousseau talked about active learning, that children were not passive learners. We didn't pour knowledge into their heads. They actually actively engaged in learning, which doesn't seem surprising to us now, but at the time that he was thinking through his ideas of children and researching, it was surprising. He also looked at phases of development, which was a big topic around the time he and Freud and other theorists were working. They hadn't really thought about the fact that children weren't just little small adults, that they were individual learners and that they developed in different ways, and younger children didn't think and learn in the same way that older children did. Pestalozzi talked about the development of the senses, smelling, taste, sight, all of those, and talked about how to integrate curriculum so that we were really meeting children in those different areas. Froebel is one of the ones we talk a lot about in education because we really loved, all of us in the field many years ago when he was working. Not that I was alive then, but the teachers in the field when he was working. He developed this idea that children were a garden and they were seeds, and we needed to nurture that knowledge and nurture that love of learning. Montessori, you'll read about open-air preschools and her going out into nature to help children learn, which is not how we think of Montessori programs now. So there's been some shifts in how we perceive her philosophy over time. She talked about sensitive periods in learning, which now we've proven with brain research is true, that there are sensitive periods for children to learn certain concepts. She talked about sequential steps in learning. Children had to understand this step to move to that step to move to that step. And a lot of that we've proven with brain research and with a lot of the findings we've had. Steiner developed the Waldorf School, which you'll read about. He really looked at creativity and the heart and the head and how they are connected, and that learning cannot just be cognitive, that we have to plan for the environment, we have to nurture children. So you'll read about all of this in your book. Some of the early American influences, John Dewey, Patti Smith Hill, Lucy Sprague Mitchell, Abigail Elliott, you'll read about all of them in your text. There's a lot of information in your text about diversity, but there's a lot that isn't being said as well. And there's a lot of embarrassing factors that we don't talk as much about as we should. During the colonial period, there was a lot of influence of Puritans, very strict Christian religious beliefs. Bible study was for boys. Girls were expected to just do home studies and take care of the home. Discipline was very, very harsh, and economic advantage gave you access to better education, much like it still does. Southern plantations educated boys from the upper class, but not from the lower class. Free common school reform came only after the Revolutionary War, and again, it was delivered differently depending on the population of who they were educating. There's a lot of embarrassments, not just from the past in education, but what's happening now in education. African Americans up north were freed after the Revolutionary War, but they were not educated. They were not welcomed into schools. Southern plantations forbade education of slaves. After the Civil War, private and public education for young children was available, but it was segregated. It was separate, but not equal. So resources were not the same. Children were put into substandard buildings. Some children in Native American populations were taking away from their tribes and educated in separate schools to be colonized as Americans. They were forbidden to speak their home languages. They were beaten if they spoke their home languages. They were given Christian names, and their culture was erased. Many African American youth at this point in history were being pulled away from their homes and educated in separate schools that were training them to be maids, nannies, and housekeepers and cooks. It created a streamline that was racially segregated and prevented many people from achieving what they could achieve. Even if a woman was gifted, or an African American woman or an African American man was gifted and intelligent in certain areas, their work was often erased and taken over by people who were white, and so we didn't see those achievements that happened as they happened. There's a great movie, Hidden Numbers, that looks at a young girl who was African American and very, very gifted in math. Her name was Catherine. I'm forgetting her last name. Somebody will remember for me. Please post it in discussions. And she and a bunch of other women, both African American women and white women, but the movie focuses on the African American women, were part of NASA when we first went to the moon. And it was her calculations that made it possible for the first manned flight to the moon. Yet her work was written over with a man's name, a white man's name. And so education has really played a huge role in institutionalized racism. It's also played a huge role in the different type of education provided to people with higher incomes than those with lower incomes. So you'll read about some of that in your book, and there's a lot more that would not fit in one textbook. So if you're interested in more readings or videos, please let me know. And I have some titles I can recommend for you. John Dewey was considered progressive for his time. He's one of the ones we talk a lot about. He really valued childhood, and he valued the importance of play. He talked about the importance of what we plan for children, what activities we put out for children, that those experiences should be enriching for them. So you'll read more about him. A lot of his philosophies carry into what we consider to be developmentally appropriate practice now. Remember that developmentally appropriate practice needs to also be culturally appropriate. John Dewey mainly worked with young white children who were middle class to upper class. And so many of the strategies that he devised and worked on need to be adapted and thought about for children who are not from those cultures. The field has evolved quite a bit. One of the things that surprises people is that there have always been children in care. There have always been women in the workforce. There's a great author, Stephanie Kuntz, who writes about the way we never were and the way we really are, and talks about the sociology and the history of family and women. And she makes a really good point with historical references to back it up, that only rich and upper middle class women could afford not to work. All of the other women who were lower class or lower middle class had to work to support their families. When they worked, their children needed to be in care. So childcare in some form or another has existed forever. It might be a rich family paying someone to come in and take care of their children. It might be a poorer family pooling childcare resources with older generations so that they could go to work. However, in late 30s, early 40s, during World War II, when many of the men went to war in the United States and in other countries, women went into the workforce in huge numbers. When that happened, official nursery schools began in a higher number than they ever had before. And we saw as a society that we needed childcare in order to support women to build planes and to make food, to do all of the different work that men had done before they went to war. And so from those nursery schools, and that nursery came from the garden that we talked about earlier, the kindergarten, the nursery. From there, we have evolved quite a bit, and you'll see that in the textbook as you read how we've moved into really thinking about early care and education, that children are really learning under 5. It's not just about giving them nurture and love. We actually are building brains that are ready to learn by the time they get to kindergarten. The bulk of what children learn in language, they learn in the first 3 years of their life while they're with us as preschool teachers or infant toddler teachers. And that is critical to their success later in school. We have struggled in our field and every other field, including elementary ed and high school ed and college, to create equal access to education that isn't dependent on family income. We're still struggling with that. Head Start was created as an opportunity for low-income families to work in a classroom as volunteers with their children and get childcare while they went to work or went to school and further education. There's many different grants that have done that, but Head Start was one of the programs that did. You'll read about all of this in your books. I know it may be going a little fast. Please read that chapter and you'll get a lot more information. There's other people you'll read about, Schwartz, Peabody, Blow, and you'll read about their contributions to history and to kindergarten and how that was born in this country. And now we've moved into pre-kindergarten as a grade in and of itself in elementary school. Many of the pre-kindergartens do not necessarily keep the developmentally appropriate practice that we in our field consider critical. And so there's a lot of debate about what a good quality pre-kindergarten looks like. There have been interdisciplinary influences. We've had influences from medicine. Maria Montessori was a doctor. Sigmund Freud was a psychologist. A lot of people came in. Barry Brazelton was a pediatrician from different fields and contributed to what we know is good for children into our practices and our theories. There's other people who've contributed to education. Susan Isaacs, there's the progressive education movement. One of the more current ones that we talk a lot about is Reggio Emilia. And it's a city in Italy, a township that developed a philosophy of care and education for children that is truly astounding and beautiful. And so we talk a lot about it in our field. Psychology did a lot to study child development and study how children learn, and that contributed to our field. And so we'll talk a lot about theories as we move forward too. We need to think about the ethics of what we're doing with children. It's one of the big issues that we have. We'll look at the Code of Ethical Conduct for NAYC, and in that Code of Ethical Conduct, there's one particular principle we'll look at that we shall do no harm. No harm. No social harm, emotional harm. It is much more complex than just how we're physically treating a child. If we are to do no harm, we need to really understand the culture of the child. We need to understand the culture of the family. Many, many different policies have been set over the years to try and address the achievement gap between different populations that honestly has more to do with money than anything else. No Child Left Behind became what we as teachers often refer to as No Child Left Untested. It wasn't necessarily helping them achieve more, it was just testing children more. Race to the Top is another one. California has a Common Core standard that aligned curriculum across programs. California also has the Desired Results Developmental Profile. So a lot of different efforts have been made, and you'll read about some of those in your book. And they've had more or less success depending on how long they've lasted and who's contributed to them. Some of the issues today that we need to think about are family stressors. Particularly right now, our families are under so much stress. I worry a lot about where families are at. Many families got put into shelter in place and isolated at home without the resources to properly understand how to support their children's education. There's my cat. Without the resources to support healthy development for their children. They relied on the teachers in their children's classrooms in ways that they couldn't provide for at home, especially families who have children who have special needs. The poverty is one of the factors of institutional racism, and it is a factor that has incredible impact on children. There's just no words to say how much poverty plays a role in success. Children who are raised in environments with high poverty have lower success rates because they're fighting to get equal access to resources, equal access to something as simple as food. So, poverty is something that they will talk about in your chapter, and it's something for us to think about. Poverty is linked to particular groups because of the institutional practices that have kept groups with more or less access to money, jobs, education, and those types of resources. Divorce is an interesting one. Divorce has been around for a long time. It actually didn't start anytime recently. It's been around since King Henry VIII and even before. When people come together to raise children together, sometimes they don't stay together. One of the concerns we have right now in COVID-19 is that with families sheltering in place together, that some of the families are discovering that their marriage is not where they want to be, and so that there may be a higher divorce rate. Divorce can be beneficial for a child if the child is in an environment where the family is fighting a lot and there's lots of strife and stress. If the family can separate and create two homes that are free of that stress, and the parents can collaborate on their parenting and work together collaboratively and supportively, divorce doesn't have to be hard on children. However, many families struggle with that. It's hard to keep the fight of the adults away from the children. And so that's where we see the impact of divorce on children. Child abuse is on the rise not because the level of abuse that's happening for children, but because the number of people who are reporting it. And that trauma has a deep impact on children. Your book will talk a little bit about that health risk. Obesity is on the rise in the United States, and that has a huge impact on children and their health overall. And then, of course, disasters like our COVID-19 pandemic, like the earthquake in 1989 in California, like Hurricane Katrina down in New Orleans and Louisiana. Those natural disasters, the violence that we're seeing in the Black Lives Matter protests and children are witnessing, all of that puts children's mental and physical health at risk. And so your book will talk somewhat about that. And I want you to think beyond what your book's saying about what's happening now and how that ties into what your book is saying as well. In our classrooms, we are transmitting culture to our children. We can't avoid transmitting culture. Culture is all around us, like the water in a fish tank to a fish. So we are constantly transmitting our culture to everyone around us. The media, TV, movies, books we read, all of those are transmitting culture. We have, especially here in Santa Clara County, and I love it, we have deep diversity in Santa Clara County. So if we're lucky, we're in a classroom where all of the teachers come from different environments, come from different cultures, have relationships with the cultures of the families who are coming into the classroom. And hopefully our classroom of children are deeply diverse. Hopefully we have multiple languages spoken in our classroom and spoken by the teachers so the children see their home language reflected in the classroom. Bilingual education, or trilingual or quadrilingual education, is critical under 5. Children learn language in the first 3 years, 5 years, 10 years of their life in a way they never will in the rest of their life. So if we want a child to be bilingual, trilingual, quadrilingual, we need to insert those languages at young ages. And so that's one of the struggles that we talk a lot about in education. Immigration is a really important issue, a critical issue. We still have children in detainment camps on the border, and I want to know more about what's happening with them. Some of the children in your classrooms here in Santa Clara County will come from incredibly scary experiences. They may be at home with their parents one day and come the next day and talk about officers coming into their home. One child I observed at a program once was in the sandbox talking to his cousin, and they were doing pretend play. And he was saying, yes, I call my mommy on the iPad because she can't come back here. If she comes back here, the police will take her away again. So I get to talk to her on the iPad, and her number is, and then he recited her number. He knew her phone number because it was the only way he could talk to his mommy. So immigration is a very important issue in our classrooms, and it's a very important issue for our children. Children who have special needs need to be included in our classrooms, not just for them, but for the children who are in our classrooms who are typically developing. Excuse me. The inclusion of children with special needs gives everybody in the classroom a real idea of what the world is, a real understanding of the diversity of ability. Gender is a topic that's changing more rapidly than I can track as an instructor. It is fluid. Gender is not what we have perceived it to be. It is not this or that. There's a lot of diversity. Even if you take those of us who identify as women, there's diversity in how we identify as women, how we think about ourselves as women. Then you take into account the many different ways people identify. And I'm very proud of the very brave people who are speaking up about who they are and how they perceive themselves. It's difficult. Sexuality is a different issue than gender. We have families that are going to come into our classroom that have two-parent families that are two men or two women. And it's really important we know how to support family structures that are non-traditional. Many of these non-traditional families have existed for a long time. They've just existed in the shadows because it was dangerous for them to be out. Hopefully, we're creating a society where it's not dangerous for anyone to be out. It's going to take a lot of work. But that means we also have to think about in our classroom, how are we providing children's books that represent these children's lives? And we'll talk about some of that. How are we providing images of their family in the classroom so they feel represented? It's a very complex and difficult conversation. This whole piece could be at least 6 hours. Professionalism is something that is an issue today, and you'll read about in your book. We have many states and national programs that are setting standards for children's programs, standards for professional preparation, and advocacy on state, local, and federal levels about what is good for children. One of the advocacy efforts that I think is critical for us to think about right now is childcare workers are essential workers. A number of my students, and probably a number of you, are already back in the classroom with children. And even before the protests, especially before the protests, we had people being told to stay at home for their own health, to not go out. And yet our childcare workers, just like our nurses and our grocery store clerks and our delivery drivers, were there on the front line providing care for doctors and nurses, providing care for the grocery store workers. It is really important that we talk about the childcare workers as essential workers. Another point of advocacy to think about that's current is how we come out of COVID-19 and create a childcare program field that honors what we know is good for children and incorporates these new health practices. It's very challenging to do when teachers have to wear masks. It's even more challenging when in some programs they're requiring children to wear masks. or they're asking children to stay 6 feet apart from each other and not interact. We can talk about all of that. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. Lots to think about and lots to discuss. Please, there's my email. Please go back out to hi. Please go back out and read your book, read that chapter, participate in the discussions. If you have questions specifically for me, you may message me on Canvas on Inbox, or again, please join me for the Zoom tonight, Monday night, and the second Zoom that will be scheduled once I see more of the survey responses. I look forward to getting to know all of you and to spending our next 6 weeks together. Thank you.